Hello everyone, welcome back to Oni-chan. Today, Oni will bring you all a very gentle yet profound story. The story is about a young man named Redo. Because he did not have enough combat ability, Redo was expelled from the hero's party. However, he had the chance to reach a new land. Luckily, in this place, Redo accidentally met Rito. After spending some time together, they both had the opportunity to open up a new life. And that is also the reason why Redo found a completely different meaning in life. However, how this journey unfolds, let's wait and see together with Oni-chan. There was a young man named Redo. After a major incident, he arrived at a distant land. This place was called Zoltan. Only those who were running away or those who were strange could end up wandering to this place. But for Redo at that moment, this was the most suitable place for him. Redo's dream here was that he could open a small pharmacy. Redo only wished to live a peaceful life. He no longer wanted to continue dangerous adventures. However, Redo's savings were still not enough. So it seemed that he still could not open a pharmacy. At this moment, Redo's little friend appeared. His name was Tanta. Tanta came to invite Redo to visit his house. And he also wanted to give Redo some advice about the pharmacy. After that, Redo agreed. Redo shared that every creature in this world possesses a hero blessing. It is a power granted by the gods. Each person has their own unique type of hero blessing. When night fell, Redo recalled the events of the past. His comrade was named Ares. Ares could not see Redo's true abilities. Because in the last battle, Redo was completely unable to keep up with his teammates. Ares believed that if Redo continued like this, then he would surely become nothing but dead weight. There was no reason for Redo to remain with them anymore. However, Redo had put in a lot of effort to be helpful. But Ares thought that those were just excuses from Redo. After Ares' words, Redo decided to give up everything. He left and never came back. Even Redo's comrades, they did not know about this matter either. And that was the reason why Redo moved to Zoltan. However, he still worried about Rudy. Because she was Redo's only younger sister. But even if he worried, it would not change anything. In the present, Redo already had a new life. He no longer needed to join deadly battles. Nor did he have to think about stressful conspiracies. Now, Redo only needed to live a peaceful life. That was his second life in Zoltan. Redo was a man with many skills. One of them was survival skills. Redo never got lost when entering the forest. Moreover, he could distinguish many kinds of herbs. And Redo could even deal with the ferocious beasts in the forest. When Redo returned, everyone was surprised by his calmness. Because they had just seen an owl bear appear in the mountains. At this moment, Albert realized Redo was an expert in gathering herbs deep in the forest. So it seemed he would be familiar with the paths in the woods. Therefore, Albert's group prepared to attack the owl bear. Therefore, he needed Redo's help, so that Redo could guide them on the way. However, Redo immediately refused. This made Albert feel surprised. That was a great opportunity for Redo. He could even be promoted to a higher rank. But unfortunately, Redo had no interest in that. Redo only wanted to live a peaceful life. Just as he had originally planned. Because Redo did not want to stand out. Otherwise, his true identity would be exposed. Since the people in Zoltan still did not know who Redo really was, that was why he tried so hard to hide it. When Redo returned home, Gons rushed over to ask for his help. Tanta suddenly had a high fever. The doctor said he seemed to be suffering from a serious illness. So the two of them immediately went to Tanta's place. At that moment, his family was extremely worried. Tanta's illness currently had no medicine to cure it. The only way left was to pick rare herbs from the mountain. So Redo agreed to save Tanta. Thanks to Redo's lightning speed, he ran like the wind and quickly reached the mountain peak. Redo thought that he would lose time. If Redo took the shortest path, there was a chance he might run into Albert's group. So Redo had no choice but to take a longer route. Unexpectedly, while he was on the way, he accidentally encountered an owl bear. But Redo did not have much time left. So he quickly dealt with it. And Redo successfully brought back the herbs. As a result, Tanta's health stabilized. His parents were extremely grateful to Redo. Even though he could have faced danger. In the end, Redo still tried his best to cure Tanta. At this moment, the doctor thought, if someone as skilled as Redo helped gather herbs, then all the doctors in Zoltan would be very glad. Because they truly needed Redo's assistance. After that, Redo went back home. On the way back, Tanta's older brother, Gons, ran after Redo to thank him once again for his actions. To Gons, Redo was the benefactor of his family. That was the greatest honor for everyone. When Redo set foot in Zoltan, this made him smile with satisfaction. After that, Gonzi's family repaid Redo. They decided to gift him a new house. There, Redo could open a pharmacy, just as he had originally wished. Many days later, a striking blonde girl named Rito appeared. She went to see Megria. But at that moment, Megria was a little busy, because she was preparing to attend Redo's housewarming party. At that time, Megria shared. To her, Redo was a kind-hearted person, and his specialty was gathering herbs. A few days earlier, Redo had even risked danger. He ran up the mountain to gather herbs and save someone. This made Megria somewhat curious about this person named Redo. As for Redo, he was deeply grateful to Gonzi's family for this new house. To Redo, it was truly a meaningful gift. Thanks to it, he could finally open a pharmacy. With only a small amount of savings at first, Redo would try to work happily. More importantly, he could help those around him. By the afternoon, Rito arrived at Redo's pharmacy. This made him feel surprised. It turned out they had known each other before, because the two of them used to be teammates. After that, Rito wondered why Redo came to live in this place. Suddenly, she became angry after learning about what had happened in the past. Rito could not believe that Ares would treat Redo that way, since they had once fought side by side. But Redo realized his own weaknesses, and he chose to accept it. A moment later, Redo brewed tea to serve Rito. This made her extremely happy, because it had been a long time since they last met. Redo suddenly remembered the first time he met Rito. Back then, she always acted strong and tried to stay distant from others. Whenever Rito fought alongside the group, she was always the one who complained the most. This made her feel embarrassed, and she quickly explained that it was simply her way of working. At times, Rito also tried to open up, and the one she opened up to was none other than Redo. Although at first Rito seemed to struggle a lot, Redo knew how to communicate with people, so the two of them had more chances to talk, and they went through a battle together. But it did not really lead to a happy ending. At that time, Rito disagreed with her teammates. However, Redo was the one who stood by her side. The two of them joined forces to fight against evil. After that, Rito suddenly lost her spirit. She no longer wanted to fight. So Redo stayed by her side to comfort her. Because he understood, it was not that Rito truly did not want to fight anymore, but rather, she just did not yet know how to regain her courage. At that moment, Rito deeply felt his comforting words. However, she still felt fear, and she did not yet have enough courage to move forward. Fortunately, Redo was there. He believed that Rito could absolutely do it, because everyone has to go through such difficult times. To Redo, Rito was his comrade. Not only the two of them, they also had many other teammates. Everyone would walk the path together. Redo was certain that every hardship could be overcome, as long as they truly made the effort. Returning to reality, Redo wanted to cook a meal for Rito. This made her feel very excited. Suddenly, Rito asked if she could work together with Redo. She was willing to give up her current job, just so she could work together with Redo. Although at first Redo seemed hesitant, because of Rito's persuasion, Redo eventually agreed. Rito always believed that Redo was a talented person. He was truly a great man, not only because of the skills Redo possessed, but also because of his calmness and ability to see things clearly. This made Rito always want to learn and absorb from him. Although Redo found it a little hard to believe, he could see Rito's sincerity. Redo predicted that from now on, his life would be a little less boring. The next morning, Redo carefully prepared breakfast for Rito. Today they would have a lot of work to do. Rito would redecorate the pharmacy. After that, the two of them would go to the Zoltan government office to apply for permits for many new kinds of medicine. Suddenly, Rito brought up the topic of salary with Redo. She only asked for a very small amount of money. This left Redo quite surprised. He thought that such an amount was not worthy of Rito at all. However, she proposed staying at the pharmacy, so that Redo would not have to worry about salary. He was surprised by Rito's thoughtful consideration. A moment later, they started working. Zoltan was a peaceful place. Therefore, it did not require the presence of a hero. But sometimes, Rito felt that something was missing there, because whenever she remembered the old memories, every time Rito went on adventures with her comrades, it gave her a great sense of fulfillment. But now, they no longer journeyed together, nor walked that path of battle anymore. After that, the two of them went to a shop to buy a bed. On the way back, Redo saw Tanta being bullied by other kids. So he quickly stepped in to stop them. Luckily, Tanta was not harmed. However, his friend Uru was injured. So Redo thought that he needed to have his wound bandaged immediately. At that moment, Tanta was surprised, because Redo was with Redo. This made Tanta extremely curious about their relationship. But Redo only smiled faintly to brush it off. A moment later, Uru's wound was bandaged. Meanwhile, Redo still did not understand why they were fighting. However, the boy who bullied earlier was Ademi. Even Uru himself did not know the real reason. Because in the past, Ademi was never this violent. But recently, he has become short-tempered. At this moment, Redo thought it was due to the influence of the hero blessing. Perhaps Ademi had already touched upon the hero blessing, and that was the reason his personality was affected. It made Ademi become the way he is now. Because his hero blessing would lead him toward using violent means to overcome obstacles. After Uru heard this, he began to feel worried. Because Uru had also become aware of his own hero blessing. However, he feared he might turn out like Ademi. At that moment, Redo immediately came forward to comfort him. Because she also understood that facing one's own hero blessing was a frightening thing. However, it was also something that would decide each person's life. Instead of being afraid, it was best for Uru to try to face it. After that, the two of them went to Zoltan's government office. Their purpose was to certify Redo's product. However, they were rejected, because last month, a similar product had already been approved. But that one had effects similar to a drug. Therefore, people had been distributing it illegally. Indeed, it was a major nuisance. However, since this request came from Redo, the government decided to grant him approval. After everything ended, Redo felt grateful because Redo was always by his side to help him. Suddenly, she interrupted him, because Redo didn't think it was a big deal. Instead, she even felt happy to be able to help Redo. This made Redo deeply moved at that moment, and he sincerely thanked Redo. By the afternoon, Redo and Redo started thinking of ways to attract more customers to their pharmacy. Although their medicine had just been approved, people still didn't know much about it. What Redo was thinking about now was to find a product that would sell well, and it needed to come with a breakthrough idea. After that, Redo took the initiative to make dinner, so the two of them could eat while brainstorming solutions. Since the food Redo cooked was very delicious, Redo thought he should sell food alongside the pharmacy. However, that plan didn't seem practical, because Redo had never seen a pharmacy that also sold food. But after Redo thought about it for a while, he still wanted to try it once. So afterward, Redo experimented with making a type of cookie. Inside, he even included some of the bitter medicines, so that customers could take them more easily. On the following day, the people around began to grow curious about Redo's new product, so everyone started lining up to buy this special cookie. In the end, Redo sold out completely, which made him extremely excited. He even lifted Redo up in joy, because it was thanks to her idea that Redo's pharmacy now had many customers, and that made Redo very happy. On Ares' side, his group was struggling with their mission. At this moment, Danon, one of Ares' companions, thought that everything had gotten worse ever since Redo left the heroes' party. However, Ares disagreed, because that would mean everyone believed that someone like Ares was inferior to Redo. At this point, Danon didn't care about Ares. He decided to go and find Redo. For Danon, Ares expelling Redo from the party was the worst decision he had ever made, which made Ares extremely furious. But even Ruti agreed with this. What needed to be done now was to go and find Redo. The next morning, while Redo and Redo were living together in the house, the people around started to notice. They were surprised that Redo was living with Redo. So she explained the truth. At present, Redo was no longer an adventurer. She had changed her profession to selling medicine. That was why Redo was living with Redo. This revelation shocked everyone. Even Redo understood the reason. It was because Redo was the strongest adventurer in Zoltan. After that, Redo went outside to buy some necessities. A new customer walked in. It turned out to be Albert. However, Albert didn't come to buy medicine. Instead, he wanted to ask Redo about something. At that moment, Albert asked directly. He thought that the one who had killed the owl bear a few days ago was none other than Redo, because Albert had found many traces linked to Redo. However, Redo immediately denied it. Suddenly, Albert became aggressive. He brandished his sword to intimidate Redo. Fortunately, Redo appeared just in time. She gave Albert a harsh lesson he would never forget. Rito still didn't know Albert's true purpose for coming here. It turned out he only wanted to invite Rito to be his teammate. But it seemed Rito was no longer interested in that. So Albert quickly left afterward. Although Rito seemed a bit too overreactive, Rito still thanked her for what she had done just now. By nightfall, the two of them held a small party to celebrate. They felt as if a new life had just begun. The next morning, several unfamiliar people appeared at Rito's pharmacy. It turned out they were high-ranking leaders of the Adventurers Guild. Today they had come because they wanted to talk with Rito, since they knew she was living with Rito. So Rito met them to have a discussion, because she had already given up being an adventurer. The people from the guild felt very regretful. Therefore, they tried every possible way to persuade her. However, Rito firmly held on to her own decision. She had truly abandoned her previous profession. And now Rito only wanted to work at the pharmacy. And above all, she wanted to live together with Rito for the rest of her life. After that, Rito returned to the pharmacy. However, Rito had overheard everything, which made Rito feel embarrassed. Unexpectedly, Rito then gave her a bracelet. That was considered a gift for Rito, after she decided to stay by Rito's side for the rest of her life. However, Rito was the trump card of this country. Her strength made everyone feel uneasy. That was why, after people learned that Rito had retired, they tried their best to persuade her. And Big Hawk, the one who wanted to control Zoltan, was currently thinking a lot about Rito, because Big Hawk feared she might ruin his grand plan. As for Rito, she never expected there would come a day she could live with Rito. Rito remembered the days when she used to fight alongside her former companions. At that time, Rito didn't have many chances to interact with Rito. Only Yaradrala took the initiative to get close to him, which made Rito feel a little jealous. Meanwhile, Rudy noticed Rito's strange behavior. At that moment, an argument broke out between Rito and Ares. But afterward, everything settled down. A while later, when Yaradrala was with Rito, she realized that Rito had feelings for Rito. Because someone as wonderful as him was admired by everyone, this made Rito feel embarrassed. However, Yaradrala suddenly encouraged her. If Rito truly liked Rito, then she could boldly confess her feelings. Because Yaradrala also wished for Rito to find happiness. All this time, Rito had always worked hard to help his companions. Sometimes he didn't even care about himself, enduring hardships and dangers to fight. But Yaradrala wanted Rito to live for his own sake, a peaceful life with the one he loved. After a few interactions with Rito, Yaradrala realized that Rito could make that happen. On the way, when the group was on a mission, they encountered difficulties. At that moment, Rito stepped forward to sacrifice himself, so that he could draw the enemy's attention. However, Rito's companions felt uneasy, because his plan was extremely dangerous. But Rito was determined to give his all for this mission. So after that, everyone began to act. In the end, Rito safely returned. Rudy, overwhelmed with emotion, hugged Rito tightly. After that battle, Rito left the hero's party, and she decided to go on adventures alone. Unexpectedly, Rito was able to meet Rito again in Zoltan. She thought it was nothing short of a miracle. After that, Rito went out to make a delivery. Just then, she ran into Diru on the street. But he had been watching Rito for a long time. Even so, Rito didn't want to interact with Diru, so she left immediately afterward. However, Diru knew Rito's true identity. She was actually a princess. At that moment, Diru threatened to reveal Rito's secret. But she didn't care about that at all. Because for the peaceful days by Rito's side, Rito was determined to give up everything. This left Diru stunned, because of Rito's seemingly trivial desires. However, to her, none of that mattered. After that, Rito slowly walked away. The next morning, Rito went to Nayuman's clinic to deliver the medicine Nayuman had ordered several days ago. Suddenly, there was a strange noise outside. Unexpectedly, someone had collapsed. At that moment, Rito gave him a bottle of antidote. Even though he didn't know exactly what the condition was, Rito was able to create a type of medicine that could temporarily ease the symptoms. However, Nayuman soon discovered the true cause. Shockingly, it turned out to be drugs. After that, Rito returned home, but because he came home too late, Rito was extremely hungry. So Rito quickly cooked a meal for her. After that, Rito told her about what had happened earlier that morning, which made Rito surprised. She never thought it had become that serious. And the doctor had asked Rito to make more antidotes, because there might be more people affected. Since the weather was nice and cool today, Redo invited Rido to go out by the river to have fun. And she immediately agreed. The two of them truly enjoyed this time together. However, they still didn't know how to start a conversation. At that moment, Redo took the initiative to hold Rido's hand, and then she leaned closer to him. After that, they shared a sweet kiss. However, Redo seemed quite surprised by this. On the other side, with the heroes' party, they were searching for a mysterious item. At this moment, Tissagarando had a question about Rudy. Why did Rudy never sleep at night? It turned out that she had been granted the power to endure everything. Rudy didn't even need to eat or drink, yet she was still strong enough to fight. Because from the moment Rudy was born, she had already become a powerful hero. All unnecessary needs had been eliminated. So many things of Rudy have already been lost. She cannot even go look for her brother. On Redo's side, after they finished hanging out, it was time for both of them to focus on work. The condition of the patient still showed no improvement, because people were using more and more drugs. Suddenly, someone came to the pharmacy asking for help. At that moment, Rido immediately ran outside to investigate. The attacker was someone from Albert's team. More people soon appeared afterwards. They were trying to find a way to attack Rido. Just then, Albert showed up. He quickly handled the mess caused by his teammates. However, Rido had no idea what had happened to everyone. But even Albert was the same. He never expected everyone to become so violent. At this point, Albert also needed Rido's help, because things seemed to be turning more and more serious. Everyone was still continuing their investigation. However, the situation was still not improving. Rido only thought the problem was caused by drugs. Later, Tanta and Uru came to the pharmacy. Since Rido was cooking, he invited Tanta and Uru to stay and eat. At that moment, Uru began to open up. Yesterday, he felt the presence of the hero blessing. That is why Uru's feelings suddenly became uneasy. Because of this, Rido quickly searched for the cause, so that he could help Uru resolve this situation. Since Rido believed, Uru would feel very uncomfortable holding onto that uneasiness inside. Suddenly, a strange girl came into the pharmacy. It turned out she was a member of Albert's party, and she came here to apologize to Rido, because her companions had disturbed Rido. Meanwhile, Albert was having a headache, because of the mistakes his teammates had caused. When night came, Rido suddenly remembered Rudy. Since childhood, she had always been different from other kids. Rudy never carried any kind of fear within her. What was even more unusual was that she felt no emotions at all. Because of this, Rido poured his love into her, so that Rudy could experience happiness. Due to her lack of emotions from the very beginning, suddenly, Uru was gravely injured. No one knew why he ended up like that. After a while, Uru regained consciousness. He said that a demi had wielded an axe and attacked Uru's entire family. So Rido immediately rushed to Uru's parents' place. Shockingly, they were lying unconscious on the floor. After that incident, a demi went missing. Meanwhile, Uru's parents were treated at Big Hawk's place. During this time, Rido was the one who took care of Uru. At that moment, he asked Rido to teach him how to use a sword. So afterward, she immediately took action. Rido taught Uru little by little. As a result, Uru's health gradually improved. However, Rido felt a bit uneasy, because in the past, she had never taught anyone before. Rido was afraid that she might make many mistakes. But Rido was always there to encourage her. At this moment, Tanta's family came to inform Rido that Tanta had also been taken away by others, while he was playing at the neighbor's house. Suddenly, the guards appeared and captured Tanta. This made his parents extremely worried. So Rido and Rido went together to meet the captain of the guards. At that time, Tanta successfully met his father. After a while, the guard captain spoke up. The reason he ordered Tanta's arrest was because he believed his own son was a demi, who had been killed by the people from Tanta's neighborhood. At this point, the details of the case seemed complicated, so only Rido and Rido stayed behind to talk. After that tense conversation, Rido went home. At that moment, Uru was curious because he did not see Rido appear. But Rido only told him Rido would not be coming home for a while, so Rido would be the one to train with Uru. After that, Rido taught Uru many new lessons, different from what he had learned before. They trained together until nightfall. At that moment, Uru revealed that afternoon he had been approached by a stranger. That person gave Uru a sword. It was an expensive sword. After Uru tried holding it, he felt as if he would become a hero like Rido. However, At present, Uru did not know whether that was his true feeling or not. So Redo, who was by his side, gave him a solution. Uru could try asking what his sword wanted. At midnight, Rido went to investigate everything alone. Unfortunately, she was discovered by some bad guys. So they kept trying to attack Rido. Luckily, Danon appeared. He quickly dealt with them in Rido's place. At that moment, Rido was surprised by Danon's appearance. But he directly told Rido. Danon had been sent here by the hero's party to search for Rido. So Rido became worried, thinking that Danon would take Rido back to the hero's party. At that moment, Danon confided that after everything, perhaps Rido had found a place that truly felt like home. In that case, Danon did not need to waste effort to bring Rido back to the hero's party. Unexpectedly, some troubles were also happening in this place. However, Danon thought that he should not appear in front of Rido. So Danon wanted to exchange information with Rido instead, and they agreed on the earliest day to meet again. After that, Rido returned to the apothecary to meet Rido. At that moment, Rido informed her that Big Hawk had sent someone to bring a sword to Uru. So Rido wanted Rido to examine it carefully. Unexpectedly, that sword had been enchanted with magic. Because of that, Rido could not understand why they had given it to Uru. Afterward, Rido ate the pastry Rido had prepared. She felt extremely happy when the two of them were together. However, Rido herself did not know how long it would last. On the hero's side, they were fighting for the difficult mission ahead. However, without Rido's support, Ares now realized Rido's importance. But everything seemed too late. As for Rido and Rido, the two had officially come together. And now they finally had a clear relationship. The next morning, the villains planned to kidnap Uru. However, they were mistaken. That person was none other than Rido. She had been waiting for them since early on. As for Uru, he also thought everything at the apothecary would be safe. However, Big Hawk had planned one step ahead. So they succeeded in capturing Uru. Because Big Hawk wanted him to become Zoltan's hero. And to train Uru into a powerful hero who would obey and follow Big Hawk's commands. His ultimate goal was to become the ruler of Zoltan. Unexpectedly, Ademi had also been captured. At that moment, Big Hawk brought both boys out onto the balcony. He tried to use Uru to kill Ademi. And after that, everything would surely descend into chaos. War might break out immediately. Unexpectedly, Uru did not intend to kill Ademi, because he realized that his sword did not want to do so. Luckily, someone appeared at that moment. That person was Rido. He quickly rescued them, and Rido brought Ademi and Uru to a secret place. After that, the ally cooperating with Rido appeared. He quickly took Ademi and Uru to a safer location. Meanwhile, Big Hawk's men also showed up, and even Albert was with them. They joined forces to attack Rido. At that moment, Albert was surprised by Rido's strength. He thought that in the past, Rido must have also been a hero. So Albert wanted to join forces with Rido. Together, they would turn Zoltan into a powerful city. It would no longer be peaceful. And as little known as before, Albert wanted to transform Zoltan into the center of the world. And here, Albert would become Zoltan's champion. However, Rido immediately refused. He only wanted a peaceful life. At that moment, Albert became furious. He advanced to attack Rido. But in truth, Albert was no match for Rido. He lost one of his hands. Albert burst into tears, because Rido had crushed his scheme so easily. However, to Rido, a hero needed more than just strength. They also needed the will to rise above. And Albert did not have any of those qualities. That was the very reason Albert failed. In the end, everything finally came to an end. Ademi and Uru were able to return home. They would have a new life. After this incident, many days later, people were talking about View. Even though he had only just arrived in Zoltan. Because of View's overwhelming strength, he amazed everyone around him. They thought View was very suitable to become a hero. As for Rido, his apothecary had no customers at all. That made Rido worried, because if this situation continued, both Rido and Rido might face financial difficulties. However, according to Rido, at present it was winter, so the weather was very cold. Therefore, the people in Zoltan rarely went outside, so it was understandable that there were no customers. At that moment, Rido suddenly came up with an idea. Rido could create a warming pouch, just like when he previously invented those cookies. That way, they might attract many customers again. So the next day, Rido gave everyone a chance to try the newly made warming pouch. and it could retain heat for many hours. After learning about its usefulness, everyone wanted to buy one. After Redo finished his promotion, he met Rito again. At that moment, they sat together under the snow in a very romantic way. The two of them warmed each other and shared a kiss. The next morning, Ruti and Tissagarando decided to head to Zoltan. However, they needed to disguise themselves, so that the townspeople would not discover their true identities. Unfortunately, on their way, Ruti and Tissagarando were stopped by someone. But with just one hand, Ruti sent that guard flying far away. This caused the surrounding people to whisper among themselves, because of Rudi's striking presence. After that, they needed to look for an inn. In the evening, since Redo had some business, he went to the place where Rudi had been earlier that afternoon. At that moment, Redo was inside a restaurant. Unexpectedly, Tissagarando was also there. However, neither of them knew anything about each other. After that, Tissagarando took her food and left, and she told Rudi about Redo. From a few actions and gestures earlier, Tissagarando thought Redo was not a simple person, because after only a few minutes of conversation, Redo had already noticed Tissagarando's weapons and equipment. She thought Redo might be an adventurer in Zoltan. However, they were still uncertain, not knowing whether to cooperate with or oppose Redo. But at this point, Ruti still did not know that the person they had been talking about all this time was actually Redo. The next day, since Ruti had a small matter, she wanted to visit a nearby apothecary. Unexpectedly, when Ruti arrived there, she and Redo happened to meet again. Ruti happily ran to hug her older brother. Tissagarando was completely surprised by this scene. When Ruti reunited with Redo, she immediately wanted to go adventuring together with him, because after Redo had left, the entire heroes' party had completely collapsed. At that moment, they desperately needed Redo to accompany them. After hearing Ruti's heartfelt words, Redo was utterly surprised, because he thought Ruti and the others' journey was still going smoothly. He never imagined it was growing worse and worse. However, Redo refused, because he had already found meaning in this place. Therefore, Ruti also wanted to stay here together with him. A little while later, Rito appeared as well, but since Ruti had something to do, she hurried back to the inn. Unexpectedly, while Ruti was on her way back, she suddenly collapsed, which made Tissagarando extremely worried. As for Rito, she thought that Ruti really needed Redo. Perhaps it would be better if he went with Ruti. But Redo also understood that, because Ruti was still just a 17-year-old girl. However, Redo needed more time to think it over. The next day, Ruti came to the apothecary to help Redo. But the customers were terrified by her expression, so they ran away immediately afterward. After that, Redo brought Ruti to the town. To introduce her more clearly to this place, Redo took Ruti to the sauna. There, he introduced his little sister to the owner. Next, Ruti got to experience the feeling of being there, which made her feel happy, because it had been so long since Ruti had been together with Redo like this. However, she carelessly revealed her strength, which drew the attention of everyone around. But for Redo, that was not a problem. Standing out a little was fine, because Redo also felt proud to have such a talented little sister like Ruti. At that very moment, Ruti wished that today could last forever. As for Albert, he was personally treated by Teodora, yet Albert still could not understand why someone with strength like Redo would not want to become a hero. However, in Teodora's view, people needed to pursue the way of life that suited them. Perhaps Redo himself already knew what he wanted. Even though Redo possessed the power of a hero, he did not necessarily have to live that way, because Redo could completely choose his own path. And Teodora was the same as Redo. She was also searching for her own path. As for Ruti, she was served her favorite childhood drink by Redo. At that moment, Redo thought that the inn where Ruti stayed would not have a bath. So he told Ruti she could bathe before heading back. Thus, Ruti wanted to bathe together with Redo. And Tissagarando also wanted to join in. After that, Redo had the chance to talk with Ruti. She was curious about what Redo was like as a child. Unexpectedly, Ruti thought he was no different from now. Redo had always seemed cool in Ruti's eyes, because back then, Ruti looked very weak. Her very first battle was climbing a mountain to find a lost child. At that time, Ruti was only 5 years old. She was still very small. But because she was a hero, Ruti could not just stand by. She tried to use her own strength to save the lives of others. However, Ruti was always spoken ill of. People around her believed she was a frightening child. And Redo was the one who always stayed by her side. That always made her happy. Back when everyone was still in the hero's party, Rudy was very jealous of Redo, because she could always express herself freely and do whatever she wanted. However, those things were something Rudy could never do. And at present, Rudy did not want to be a hero at all. She wanted to be free, just like Redo. However, everyone knew this was not an easy decision. After everyone returned, Redo was deeply grateful to Tissagarando, because she was willing to be friends with Rudy. Redo knew it was never easy for Rudy to be able to get along with others. However, at present, Redo sensed that something was unusual about Rudy, but he did not know where to begin. At this moment, Tissagarando revealed that a few days ago, Rudy had helped Godwin escape from prison. So, perhaps everything started from there. Therefore, Redo decided to go to Godwin to ask for the truth. On the way, Redo happened to run into Danon. Unexpectedly, Teodora and Albert were also there, so they immediately went into hiding, to avoid being discovered by Redo's group. As for Danon, he was very happy to meet Redo again. Here, he was able to enjoy delicious food. Back when Danon was in the hero's party, he had to eat Ares' terrible food every single day. Later, Danon grew curious about why Redo had left the hero's party. But Redo's reason was simple, only one thing. He could no longer keep up with everyone in battle. However, Danon eventually understood. After Redo left the hero's party, it turned out he possessed great strength. Redo even had true courage. He helped his companions make wise decisions. And those decisions truly benefited everyone. No matter what difficulties Redo faced, he was indeed a genuine strong warrior. However, Redo had already found his own life here. Unfortunately, he could not continue traveling with everyone. And now Danon also understood Redo's decision. Yet, he still did not know what he should do next. So Danon chose to stay in Zoltan, to observe what Redo was doing. But Redo had one problem. At the moment, Rudy was also here. This greatly surprised Danon. He still did not understand anything about the current situation. The only thing Danon could do now was fight. After that, he went to Ares. Danon informed that Redo was here. Redo even intended to live in Zoltan forever. And he had opened a pharmacy together with Redo. Danon thought that it seemed the two of them were living a happy life together. However, that made Ares furious, because right now Ares was fighting day and night, while Redo was here, happily in love with Redo. This made Ares unwilling to accept it. And there was one more thing. That was Rudy also knew about Redo's presence here. So at that moment, Ares wanted Danon to take him to the pharmacy. When Ares arrived, he smashed everything inside the pharmacy. Ares even vented his anger on Redo's belongings. As for Redo, he was utterly shocked that Shizenden was still alive, because that was an evil demon, who had already been defeated by the hero's party before. But unexpectedly, Shizenden had survived, so now, Redo and Danon had to set out for Shizenden's location, in order to stop him from causing harm. On the way, Redo happened to meet Rito and Tissagarando. At that moment, Rito was surprised that Danon had met Redo. So she revealed that she had already met Danon before. However, he seemed different from usual. After some investigation, it turned out the Danon that Rito had met earlier was a fake. That imposter was none other than Shizenden in disguise. So this time, Redo made up his mind. He would defeat Shizenden once again. This time, Redo would not hesitate to fight again. No one needed to avoid battle to the point of enduring suffering anymore. And Redo would be the one to set out first. After that, he went to meet Rudy. Redo learned about her greatest problem at the moment, because Tissagarando had revealed it to him beforehand. So he gave Rudy a bottle of medicine to suppress her hero blessing. However, Rudy did not understand why Redo did that. She thought Redo did not need to save someone like her. But everything Redo did was only because he wanted to protect his little sister. Not because Rudy was a hero, but because she was extremely important to Redo. At that moment, Rudy could not have imagined that after she helped Godwin escape from prison, she even intended to give up being a hero. Yet Redo still forgave her. Redo even supported Rudy, because that was her own life. Every decision of Rudy would depend on herself. This made Rudy deeply moved at that moment. After a while, everyone reunited, and then Ares also found them. He wanted Rudy to return as a hero and continue fighting. However, this time she refused Ares. Rudy would no longer go adventuring with him. So Ares flew into a rage. And afterward, Rudy struck at Ares, because she did not want things to get worse just because of Ares' selfish thoughts. Unexpectedly, Shizenden appeared at that moment, and they temporarily teamed up together. As for Rito, she worried that Ares would commit even worse deeds. Earlier, Tissagarando had seen Ares walking with another man. Rito suspected that person could be Shizenden. Rudy truly did not understand what his purpose was. So Rito decided to go ask directly. He feared that Ares was being deceived. However, Danon was already one step ahead. He was confronting Shizenden, and Danon gave Shizenden a lesson he would never forget, because of all the evil schemes he had made in the past. At that moment, Shizenden begged Ares for help, but while he was still hesitating, Shizenden immediately counterattacked, and in the end, Danon lost that battle. He collapsed right in front of Ares. However, Ares remained strangely calm. He thought that perhaps he had already betrayed his comrades too many times. As for Rito, Rudy returned to him the sword that she had kept for him back when they were in the heroes' party. After that, everyone encountered Shizenden, so they immediately attacked him. They all joined forces to restrain Shizenden. At that moment, Teodora appeared. Suddenly, she tied up Rito, and then Teodora rushed in to attack Rudy. Even though she knew that things would get worse, Teodora now needed Rudy's sacrifice. But Rudy did not understand why she did that, for the simple reason that Rudy was a hero. However, from the beginning, she had never wanted to be one, and Rudy had no need to sacrifice herself for this. Even Rito agreed with that. It was not necessary for Rudy to sacrifice everything, because she also had her own life. Everyone had their own choices and desires. As for Ares, at this point, he was no longer normal. Perhaps because of his own selfishness. Ares had now become very different from before, and then he was killed by Rito, for all the sins that Ares himself had committed. Meanwhile, Rudy's situation was still tense. She was still fiercely fighting against Shizenden. Suddenly, Rudy turned around. She attacked Rito. Fortunately, Tissagarando was able to block her at first, but Rudy continued the same way, leaving everyone confused. After a while of fighting, Rudy suddenly burst into tears. The others then appeared one after another. At that moment, Rudy quickly tried to save Tissagarando, but she failed, so Rudy was extremely worried. Luckily, Teodora was there, and she succeeded in healing Tissagarando. However, this was not Teodora's attempt to ask for everyone's forgiveness. Perhaps Teodora had been thinking in a negative way, because after Rito left, the heroes' party had fallen apart. From that very moment, Teodora realized Rudy no longer needed her companions by her side. She could fight on her own. Rudy was becoming increasingly isolated, with no way out. Therefore, Teodora thought that it was truly an unbearably cruel mission. Even so, Teodora still wanted Rudy to live as a hero, so that she could save the world. As for Albert, he had always longed to become a hero, and Albert truly admired everyone. But he never expected that with such a decision, the mission of saving the world would be so cruel. This was something Albert had never really imagined. Even Teodora herself did not know what was right anymore. Perhaps she had been wrong, but Teodora had always been a hero. She had also fought for the world, in the way that she believed in. So at that moment, Albert sincerely begged everyone to spare Teodora's life. At that moment, Tissagarando woke up. She apologized for making everyone worry. Returning to Teodora, to Rudy, Teodora was the true hero, because she had always fought regardless of herself. In the end, Teodora had only cared about the world, but Rudy was not like that. All along, the thoughts in her mind had been completely different. It was the circumstances that had made Rudy become that way. So now, Rudy wanted to continue living as Rudy. However, she would live a life of her own. Many days later, Rudy's group came to Rito's house for breakfast. At that time, she discussed something with everyone. Rudy now wanted to grow medicinal herbs. As for Ares, he had already found peace. He was no longer controlled by anything else. So everyone gradually felt relieved. When Rito and Rito were at home, the two of them were glad that all the troubles had finally ended. They could now live peacefully together. Rito always felt grateful, even though Rito knew he had many flaws. In the end, Rito still wanted to stay by Rito's side. That was a truly sacred kind of love. Perhaps this place was the final destination of Rito's journey, and he felt very happy about that. This made Rito deeply moved. She also felt the happiness of being with Rito. This was the moment to end the old journey. But it was also the time to begin a new one, a gentle yet wonderful journey. The next day, Rito went out with Rudy and spent time together. She didn't expect that. Finally, there would be a day when Rudy could live with Redo. Though simple, it made her feel incredibly happy. That's all for today's video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support Oni-chan in the next videos. Thank you for watching. Love you all forever.